So we're going to start. We did an agroforestry internship at our terreno. It was an internship carried out under the supervision of Joshua and Sebastian, and it was done for my university as part of the third year criteria. I had to do a 6-month internship abroad that was related to agriculture in some way. And then I had to hand in a final output, which ended up being a report, which was the analysis of the different soils in the different regions. And at the end was the agroforestry design with all the trees. And you will see the report. I will show you through the Teams meeting. So the roles of Joshua and Sebastian: Joshua provided the support, the direction, the means and supplies, and the motivation. And Sebastian provided the specialized knowledge, guidance, time, and motivation as well. And the goal of this internship was to provide enough information to answer my research question, which was for my report. And the research question is, how did the soil, in terms of different soil horizons, color, organic matter, minerals, pH, differ between conventional farming practices and agroforestry practices at different altitudes in Ecuador? And that picture is actually a picture of when we were making the compost. So all of these pictures are actually pictures either I took, Sebas took, or Joshua took, or there was another intern that was doing some photography. So we have some objective of the different activities that we did. For the soil trial pits, the objective was to understand basic soil profiles, identify and observe factors that affect the soil. The objective for the lab analysis was how to collect the soils and how to read the analysis. The lessons and excursions provided exposure to sustainable knowledge and practices. And the garden was to teach me how to make a garden, learn the gardening foundations, and how to maintain it. The agroforestry was to learn the importance of trees and incorporate them into a finalized design sheet. And accounts, yeah. Sorry, I need to, okay. All right, in the beginning, we dug soil trial pit, which we called Calicata, and it's basically just a hole, a square that's 1 meter by 1 meter, and then it's 1 meter deep. Sometimes it can be 2 meters deep depending on where the horizon sea is. And you basically dig this hole and you have the flat horizon, try to get it so that the sun is facing it, and then you observe all the little features like the root, the color, the structure, and then you can identify all the different layers, and it usually tells you like the story of the soil. And before we do the soil trial pit, you also have to analyze the environment and the observations around you. So what are the agricultural practices? Is it on a slope? The climate, the vegetation, and the altitude is quite important because that also affected like the minerals and the pH and organic matter. Okay. So this is a slide that I'm not going to go through them in depth, but it's just to show the different soil horizons that you can get and the soil horizons that we try to identify. So we have the layer O, horizon A, horizon E, horizon B, and horizon C. And horizon R we didn't usually get because the soil was too deep. So we usually got to horizon C in the Andean soil. So one of the things that I had to put in my report as well was all the different subsections when analyzing and when doing the soil trial pit. That included the structure and the roots. The structure was analyzed in 3 parts. First, the type, the class, and the grade. The type of the structure refers to the geometric form that the fragments of the soil maintain. And the types of structure can either be granular or crumbly, laminar blocks, prismatic, and columnar. And then after that, we have the class. And the class also depends on what the type of the structure is, because if we have very fine and it's less than 1 millimeter, the class will be no, if we have lamina and it's less than 1 millimeter, the class will be very fine. But then if we have something that's bigger than 1 millimeter, but it's of a different type, then it will be of a different class. So like you have to find the where they meet on the table. Yeah. Where did we dig? This is for the soil trial pit that we did. We did 6 locations and 6 farms, 3 main altitudinal zones, and it was a comparison between the conventional and the agroforestry. So there would be 2 farms in each altitude, 1 conventional and 1 agroforestry, so we could see where the altitude actually takes effect and how it impacts the different factors of each system. After we did the soil trial pits, we did soil lab analysis, and to collect the soil samples, we would walk in a W shape across the field and first scrape away the top surface, and then we would collect some of the soil about like 10 centimeters deep, and like you can see on the diagram with the W shape and the red dot to kind of randomize where you collect the soil. Then you mix all the soil together in a big like box or whatever you have, and then you take just 1 kg to be sampled. So both of the lab analysis and the Kalikata were done on the 6 farms, and that's what we're going to run through. We're going to go from farm 1 to farm 6 just to kind of get an idea of all the places we went and all the soil we saw. It was a really cool experience. So on the first farm, this was in like a subtropical region, so it was much more humid, lower altitude. As we can see, the approximate altitude this altitude was 913 meters, 5 hectares. It was in the mountains, but most of the places we went to had mountainous landscapes. And this farm did an agroforestry system of banana, orange, and coffee. The second farm we went to was on that same farm, but they had 2 different systems. One which was a pasture for the cattle, and one which they were doing agroforestry. So this was the pasture used for cows. It still had some native trees integrated into it, but it had monoculture grass, so that could have been improved on. Some nitrogen plant could have been incorporated, and also at a low altitude. The third, okay, first of all, I need to say farm 1 and farm 2, we compared them against each other. And then farm 3 and farm 4, we compared them against each other. And farm 3 was called La Simona. It was an agroforestry. It's like multi-crops and trees as well as sheep. We can see like in these 2 pictures, the first picture, you can see a lot of different plants in that area. But then the second picture, it looks like there's just 1 plant, but it's actually just, I think, chocho, which is just to help break up the soil and add nitrogen to it. So it's not really a monoculture commercial growing of a crop. It's just there to help improve the soil. And this was at a higher altitude than the subtropics. It was 2,622 meters, and it was very small, just 1 hectare. And then this was farm 4, and it was called La Merced, conventional pasture. They just used it for cows. And when we were analyzing the soil, it had a really compact upper horizon from all the cattle trotting on it. You can definitely see these differences when, like, even just observing for the first time. They're currently trying to incorporate bio inputs, and they aim to be more organic. I'm sure Sebas would have also mentioned some of the things he did there, because in the distance in the photo on the right, you can also see a field that's much more green, and that's the field that they are just trying to use the like multi-cropping system and also the organic fertilizer that they're making with the vermicompost, with the worms. Yeah. Then we have the last 2 farms which we compared against each other, and these are in Attendower, which you guys will all know. And the first farm was Louise's farm, and he did agroforestry. and he grows fruits, native trees, and vegetables. It's located in the Andes. So these two farms had the highest altitudes out of all of them. And they were, well, this one's also smaller, it's just 2 hectares. And then El Terreno, which is 2.5 hectares, grows a multitude of crops, not just corn and legumes, but on the main field where we did the soil analysis, the corn and legumes had been growing before. And this is the farm that we did the agroforestry design for. So in the report, which I will show at the end of this presentation, I had to do some recommendations. And so these are just like a very brief breakdown of the recommendations given, which Sebastian and I also discussed while we were in Ecuador. So farm 1 should plant deep taproot trees and increase the compost. And this will help break up the soil and also help like circulate the minerals. Farm 2 should increase the biomass. When I was doing the report, I found all of the farms had deficit in boron and boron and sulfur. And one of the ways to increase that is just to increase the biomass and increase composting so that, yeah, they can be circulated into the soil, which was interesting. The farm 3 should cultivate more chocho, which is an Andean lupin bean. They have a really deep taproot, and they also help with the nitrogen, as mentioned before, and to inoculate with microorganisms, because microorganisms also help with mineral circulation, and they help with the breakdown of the compost, and yeah, they also help break down the soil itself. Farm 4, increase organic material, inoculation of microorganisms. Farm 5, increase biomass. And Farm 6, El Terreno, cultivate chocho, inoculation, biomasses. And terraces can also, because before we were going to do the agroforestry design, there was some concern that the terraces would compact the soil more, which makes sense because of the machinery needed. But it helps a lot with soil erosion, and because the trees will be planted in between the terraces as well, it will actually end up being more beneficial. So now we go to the agroforestry design. What we did is we went to different nurseries at different altitudes. We needed to go to different altitudes because we knew the trees that we were going to grow were going to be growing in a high altitude. So we couldn't just go to a tree nursery somewhere with a low altitude and all these trees growing really great, and then when we planted them up in the Andes, they might have died. And then the species available were recorded, and there ended up being 3 main tree nurseries, Guaranda, Riobamba, and San Simon. But the Guaranda one was preferred because we could get trees in exchange for plastic bottles, so essentially free trees. Yeah, and when we did the agroforestry design, we measured the perimeter of the farm, and we also were able to use Google Earth, and the topography was measured because we had another volunteer who had a drone and was able to take aerial photos of the farm that we could use for the planning. And that's what you see in that little photo. This was taken by the drone of one of the volunteers named Eddie. And so we divided this up so we could say, okay, this part is going to be the silver pasture, and at the bottom with the steeper slope, we were going to have the native forest and then the food forest. So all these different areas had all these different criteria, and like we didn't want to block some sun out from certain areas, so we wouldn't have trees of a certain height. And especially in the left-hand corner, we know there's dogs, so we chose some bushes that are more spiky and hard to get through, and tried to think of all the different criteria needed for each little region. And then I will show you, while the screen is shared as well, this Excel sheet. It has the list of all the trees on the left, and then how many and where we were going to get it from, which was really nice and easy to see, and Joshua gave us this idea. So these were the activities that we did specific to the report, but after that we also still did other activities to help with the general Andean agroecological knowledge. These included gardening, beekeeping excursions, DIY pesticides and fungicides, fertilizers, compost, and theoretical lessons. So first, I hope everyone's seen the garden. First, we decided the garden location, and there was a crop design. Credit to Samir, a fellow intern from Canada. He was great to work with. And we cleared the land, and we made the beds, and we made the fence around so the cute little chicken wouldn't destroy our garden. And then you can see the garden after it's grown. We had, I think it was 23 different plants in this little garden. It was so fun. And we watered it consistently. And then we also used our own pesticide and fungicide that we made. And you will see like later on in this presentation, some of the things we made briefly. So we could try our own product out. We did some beekeeping with Sebas and learned the theory of the beehives as well. And it was a really, really eye-opening experience. It like teaches you to be aware of your energy and your breathing and how you are in a situation subconsciously. So it was great. And bees are also very beneficial to the ecosystem, and you can incorporate them into agroforestry designs as well. And it's part of agroecology. So this is just the brief sort of pesticides and fungicide that we did. We did a fungicide, which was horsetail grass. We just cut up the horsetail, put it into a pot of water, let it boil for an hour, and then let it soak. And that was the concentrate of the horsetail. For the insecticide, we did a chili and garlic extract, which just included blending chili and garlic up and then putting it into alcohol, but it was like 70 to 80% alcohol, and leaving it to extract, and then draining it, and then that was the concentrate. So all of these had to be added with water before spraying it. And the mode of action was repellent, and it disrupts pheromones. That's also for the soap. The soap also suffocates the aphid. That's another mode of action. So this is the fertilizer we did, which was the Frutivono or fruit fertilizer. And so if you want to read more, it's also in the gardening manual that was made for this internship. It had this recipe and direction, so you can ask for more information. But overall, we just had a bunch of overripe fruits. We cut it up into lots of small pieces. So there was still some oxygen, and in layers added molasses and aromatic herbs, and then let it sort of ferment. And you can add there is a dosage to use for that. And it's good for fruit trees as well, which makes sense because it's fruit. And then we also made a compost tea. There's Samir featuring again on the top right photo. And the compost tea was also just basically, it's also in the gardening manual, but to be concise, it was just manure and half manure and then half herbs, legumes, all in a sack, like an actual tea bag. And then you put it into the liquid, and the liquid is just water, milk, and molasses. And the milk and molasses is good for the microorganisms. And then you just let it ferment, stir it so it's oxygenated, and it should smell good. The moment it starts to smell bad, it usually means something has gone wrong. And then we have the compost, and the compost uses 4 principles: microorganisms, oxygen, water, and material. So those are the principles of the compost. And you can see the compost in El Terreno as well. So this internship was kind of the foundation for the first oxygenated compost, at least with the different layers, and you need to turn it so it still has all the oxygen. And earth from the forest is important because that helps to inoculate the compost with native microorganisms, and the yeast is good for fungal microorganisms. We also did some theoretical lessons while we were on this internship. This included a range of different things, like how to calculate the number of trees for a silvopasture, how to practice biodynamic farming. So we would learn like when is the best time to fertilize, when the moon is like increasing or decreasing, waning or waxing, when is a good time to harvest according to the moon as well, according to like the humidity. So that was really interesting because it's important to see the signs and cycles of nature. And then we had the beehive and the different stages of the bees, which was important to learn before we went and did the actual beekeeping with Sebastian. Yeah, that's it. Does anyone have it? Oh, sorry, let me show you the report. Okay. So this is the report in the end, the final result that I handed into my school. So we had the agroforestry internship. This is just very structural because of all the criteria that was needed to tick. So we first have the introduction, which ended with the research question and the different hypotheses, materials and methods, which showed what we did to analyze, like how we collected the soil samples, the regions, and this was to measure the angle of the slope. We used trigonometry to calculate the angle of the slope. And then the different soil horizons for the physical observations and the different variables that we would see, and the sub-questions that all of this observation and research would answer. And this is what we saw in the presentation as well, with the example of how the type can affect what the class of the soil is. Yeah, then we have the maps and the results for each of the calicatas dug, and the discussion to say why something was affected, and it like goes more into how altitude could have affected like the pH or some minerals. The only conclusive research I found in terms of altitude affecting minerals was with nitrogen. It seems that the with increase in altitude, there is an increase in nitrogen supply. And that's quite, and then the conclusions. And basically, in the conclusion, we could see that the agroforestry systems do in fact yield better results than the conventional systems. They tend to have higher mineral content. There's more organic matter, obviously, because there's more biomass provided from the trees themselves. And the structure was also better. It didn't have any like waterlogged, and well, it did, but not as extreme as the conventional farm. Then we have the recommendations, which were briefly mentioned in the presentation. And then we have the agroforestry design. So this was all the list of trees and the criteria needed for each tree and the quantity of trees. And then we could see this little Excel. So here on the left-hand side was all the trees. These were the characteristics. And then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, like these numbers represent a side on this image. So you could refer to which length and which side the trees would be planted. And then this shows where all the trees were going to be obtained from. And these green areas were the areas that we actually bought the trees for internally, because we originally just planned the agroforestry design for the perimeter. And because there wasn't enough time to do everything, only some of the trees were planned for the inside as well. And this was the Google Earth, using it to calculate the area. And that was it. And these were the links I used. And these are the results. So this was the Excel of all the calicata, and these were the lab analyses. And this was the recipe for the compost tea. Yeah, that's officially it. Does anyone have any? I will stop sharing my screen. Yeah.
Thank you, Kate. Lots of hard work that you put into that and a very comprehensive presentation. Well done. Thank you very much for that.
Thank you.
Obviously, there's a lot of information in there. So if you were to sum it up into the three main priorities of what we should do in El Terreno, and if you think it's relevant for the other farmers in Atandao, what would it be?
To integrate trees into their farming system, to start using more ecological inputs like the fertilizers and the compost, because it also ends up being a lot cheaper. And did that count as two, compost and also like the fertilizers and the fungicides? That's three.
Those three you'd recommend?
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Really enjoyed that presentation. Super useful.
I'm so glad.
I don't have much expertise on agroforestry, but my question for you is, from your internship and your studies, what was your key finding in comparing conventional farms with agroforestry design?
I mean, that's a good question, because some of my key findings were things I already understood before, like that trees could help break up the soil and bring more mineral to the soil. I already knew that before, but doing this internship made me see the actual evidence of it. And one thing that was also quite eye-opening is how cheap it is to make like the compost tea and to make the fruit fertilizer, because usually the excuse to convert from conventional to organic is that you won't have enough money to do it, how are you going to finance yourself, but there are ways to actually make it cheaper. But I do think that these ways work on a small scale. If you have a large scale farm that's like hectares and hectares and hectares, I'm not sure if the same results are going to be true for that. That makes sense. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, thanks. That was really useful. Thank you.
Cool.
Once the agroforestry, imagine all the trees are there and the trees are fully grown. How long will it take, do you think, to rebuild the soil to original pre-industrial levels?
I feel like Sebastian could answer this question better, but my answer would be like 5 to 10 years. Yeah. I think 5 years minimum, but realistically it would be more because of the damage that's been done.
And what do you think, this isn't so much part of your research, but from the stuff that you looked at, what do you think the opportunities are for local farmers? What sort of things could they grow which would be more profitable?
Definitely like local crops. So I remember just before I left, we were also thinking about doing an Andean garden. That would be more profitable because that's crops that are adapted to that environment. So they are going to grow best because, that's what they've been evolved to do. So I remember we were mentioning like there were some Andean potatoes, some Andean grain, and I would just focus on more native crops. Yeah.
I don't think I've got any more questions right now. Sebastian, do you have any questions?
Kate, the comparison between the soil analysis between the conventional farm and agroforestry, agroforestry farms,
Mm-hmm.
what do you find this? This is a change in the soil minerals or in the organic material? What do you find? Soil analysis.
Okay, in the soil and like the lab analysis.
Yes.
Okay.
And even in the structure of the soil and the layers, even if there are more soil.
Okay. I didn't include this in the presentation just because it's quite like there are quite a lot of variations. It's not a common one answer fits all the different comparisons. They were different for each farm. But I did obviously find that there was more organic matter in all the agroforestry farms because they, except for one, had a layer O, whereas none of the conventional farms had a layer O. And I'm not sure for which I'm not sure for which farm this result was for, but there was one farm which had like laminar structure, and it was for the conventional farms, and it's usually because like there's more compaction and the soil's waterlogged. So that was also for the trial pit. I'm gonna quickly go through some of the results in the report just to like answer this question better. Because I know for phosphorus and for potassium, these were also higher concentrations in all the agroforestry systems compared to the conventional, except for one. And I have a suspicion, because you and I also discussed it, that this farm was labeled incorrectly. And this is the subtropical farm, because it also had like not enough phosphorus for a banana plantation, because banana usually puts more phosphorus into the soil. And okay. Another thing that I found was that the agroforestry system in the Andes had the highest calcium. Researching, I saw that Andean soils often have high calcium content, which is interesting. And this is because of the high organic carbon content, which then results in there being a high carbon content from the breakdown from the microorganism. And it's very specific. So I would have to go through each farm and each result to kind of answer that question fully. So yeah. I can send you the report though, and you can read through the results.
Thank you, Kate.
Yes, the main, the more fast change. In the lab analysis, the most fast change you find in the comparison is the organic material.
Yeah, the organic material, but also the phosphorus and potassium. All of them had a higher level compared to the conventional. Those were the two minerals that were consistently always higher.
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome.